Male mechanic rebuilds engine using memory for a bet. Next day, he's offered $1 million job. You've got exactly 12 hours, Sullivan. Not a minute more. Douglas Mercer's voice cut through the silence of the empty garage, his expensive Italian loafers clicking against the concrete floor as he circled the disassembled V8 engine. Hundreds of parts lay meticulously arranged on a blue tarp: pistons, valves, gaskets, and countless bolts of varying sizes. Frank Sullivan's weathered hands trembled slightly, not from fear but from the remnants of last night's whiskey and the gravity of what he'd just agreed to. $20,000 against his garage if he failed. A fool's wager for most, but Frank had been rebuilding engines since the Ford administration. 3 hours earlier, Frank had been nursing a bourbon at O'Malley's when Mercer and his real estate cronies had walked in, loudly discussing their plans to transform the neighborhood's eyesores into luxury condominiums. Frank knew his garage, Sullivan's Auto, established 1978, topped their list. The argument that followed had somehow morphed into this outlandish bet. Frank would reassemble a completely disassembled engine without a single manual, diagram, or digital assistance. Just his memory, his tools, and the unforgiving tick of the clock. If you're enjoying this story so far, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss what happens next. Frank had spent 35 years at Sullivan's Auto, inheriting it from his father who'd opened the place after returning from Vietnam. The garage was more than a business. It was a repository of memories, his daughter taking her first steps between tool cabinets, teaching his son to change oil before he could drive, the wake they'd held for his wife Carol after cancer took her 5 years ago. The framed photo of her still hung beside his ASE certification, her smile keeping watch over everything. "You're too old for this, Sullivan," Mercer taunted, checking his Rolex. "That tremor in your hands, how long has that been going on?" "Maybe you should have taken my offer while it was still generous." Frank ignored him, focusing instead on organizing the parts into a system only he understood. His apprentice, Miguel, had wanted to stay and help, but Frank had sent him home. "This is my fight, kid," he'd said, though now he wondered if pride had gotten the better of wisdom. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead as Frank began the methodical process of rebuilding the 1967 Mustang Shelby GT500 engine. It was the same model as his first restoration project back in '83, a labor of love that had taken him through the winter months after Carol had announced her first pregnancy. The engine had components that hadn't been manufactured in decades, modifications that weren't in any manual. As midnight approached, Frank felt the familiar ache in his lower back, the one that had started during the Reagan years and had been his constant companion ever since. His knees cracked as he knelt to examine the camshaft, mentally calculating tolerances that were second nature to him but would baffle most computer programs. 4 hours gone, old man," Mercer announced, settling into a folding chair with his tablet, scrolling through property listings. "I'm already thinking about what I'll do with this space. Maybe a juice bar or one of those boutique coffee shops." Frank's concentration remained unbroken as he fitted the pistons with new rings, his fingers moving with practiced precision despite the arthritis that had gnarled his knuckles over decades of grasping wrenches in cold garages. Each component slid into place with the satisfying click of perfect alignment. By 3 a.m., Mercer's smug confidence had begun to waver. Frank was making steady progress, his movements deliberate yet efficient. The real estate developer pulled at his collar, uncomfortable with the possibility that he might lose the bet. "Tell me, Sullivan," Mercer said, attempting to break Frank's focus, "what makes a man cling to obsolescence? These old cars, this outdated profession. It's all being replaced by computers and electric vehicles." Frank finally looked up, wiping grease from his hands with a red shop rag that had been in his back pocket so long it had molded to the shape of his wallet. "My father taught me that anything worth doing leaves your hands dirty and your soul clean," he said. "Something you wouldn't understand, Mercer." The night deepened, and the engine gradually took shape. Frank worked through a mental checklist developed over thousands of repairs, a diagnostic process no algorithm could replicate. His back screamed with pain, but there was a certain peace in this work, a communion with the mechanical that had sustained him through grief and joy alike. If you're watching from home, drop a comment letting us know where you're tuning in from, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories like this one. As dawn broke, casting long shadows through the garage's dusty windows, Frank tightened the last bolt on the valve cover. 8 hours in, 4 hours ahead of schedule. He straightened slowly, his spine protesting after the night hunched over the engine. "I believe I'm finished," Frank announced quietly. Mercer, who had been dozing in his chair, startled awake. Impossible, he said, but his voice lacked conviction. Let's find out. Frank connected the battery, primed the fuel system, and slid into the driver's seat of the partially restored Mustang. The key turned, and after a moment's hesitation, the engine roared to life with a deep, powerful rumble that vibrated through the concrete floor. It settled into a perfect idle, not a single miss or knock, just the harmonious symphony of precision engineering brought back from chaos. Mercer's face drained of color as he watched Frank perform a series of diagnostic checks, confirming that the engine wasn't just running, it was running perfectly. "I believe you owe me $20,000, Frank said, shutting down the engine, "and you can take your development plans elsewhere." What neither man noticed was the figure standing in the doorway, a woman in her early 50s wearing an expensive suit, observing the final moments of their contest with undisguised interest. "Actually," she said, stepping forward and causing both men to turn in surprise, "I believe I might have a better offer." The woman introduced herself as Catherine Wells, CEO of Retrocraft Industries, a specialized engineering firm that restored classic vehicles for museums and high-end collectors worldwide. "I've been watching your work for the past hour, Mr. Sullivan," she said, extending a business card. "What you just did, rebuilding that engine from memory with that level of precision, it's exactly the kind of expertise we're looking for." Frank stared at the card, then at Catherine, confusion evident on his oil-smudged face. "We're launching a new division focused on preserving vintage automotive engineering knowledge," she continued. "We need someone who understands these machines at a fundamental level to lead it. The position comes with a 7-figure annual compensation package." Mercer's jaw dropped. $1 million for fixing old cars? Catherine gave him a dismissive glance. "For preserving irreplaceable mechanical artistry and expertise that's disappearing with each passing year." She turned back to Frank. "You possess knowledge that can't be found in manuals or taught in modern technical schools. We'd like to document your methods, have you train a new generation." Frank looked around his garage, at the worn tools that had been his companions for decades, at Carol's photo watching over him, at the memories embedded in every oil stain on the concrete. "What about my shop?" he asked. "Keep it," Catherine replied. "Make it the East Coast headquarters for our restoration program. We'll modernize the equipment, but the soul of the place, that stays exactly as it is." 2 weeks later, Frank stood in his transformed garage. New diagnostic equipment sat alongside his trusted old tools. Miguel had been promoted to shop manager, with 5 new apprentices eager to learn from the master mechanic, whose video tutorials on classic engine restoration had already gained a devoted following online. Mercer had reluctantly handed over the check for $20,000, which Frank had immediately invested in a scholarship fund for vocational students specializing in classic car restoration. As Frank guided a young apprentice through the intricacies of carburetor adjustment on a '72 Chevelle, his phone buzzed with a text from Catherine. "Tokyo Collector just offered 1.2 M for Mustang restoration. Your expertise, your call." Frank smiled, tucking the phone away and focusing on the carburetor. His hands still trembled slightly, but now it was with the excitement of new possibilities rather than the fear of losing his past. Some things couldn't be measured in dollars: the satisfaction of perfect mechanical harmony, the joy of passing knowledge to eager minds, the continuation of a craft that connected generations. "Take your time," he told the apprentice, a young woman whose focus reminded him of Carol. "These old machines, they speak a language most have forgotten. Our job isn't just to fix them, it's to make sure their stories keep being told." If you enjoyed this story of expertise rewarded and tradition honored, hit that subscribe button and leave a comment sharing your thoughts. What skill have you mastered that others might undervalue? We'd love to hear your story.